All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Edible Software. Today we are going to continue on uh, our payable or check reconciliation area. So, just as a reminder to everyone, our last training, if you haven't seen it yet, let me know in the chat window or in an email if you haven't received it yet, and we can go through that. Last time we talked about our vendor master file and we talked about setting up those initial payable invoices. So your inventory payables, non-inventory payables. We also talked about setting up credit memos, both inventory and non-inventory. So that was the first step, of course, in getting your vendors paid. So now we're going to go through pretty much the rest of the payment process minus the reports. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is approved to pay. So all of this is considering that the payable invoices already exist, they're already in the system. So we're going to come to payables, approved to pay, approval for accounts payable. Some of these other screens, not as many clients use currently. If you have questions about them, let me know. Like the load approval form, I'm not actually going to talk about today. If you have any questions on it, let me know. But essentially, it's just a way for you to approve by load rather than by individual invoice. Um, print approved to pay is simply just a printout, which we'll actually see in the approval for accounts payable screen. It just allows you to print by vendor. And then the audit feature is actually something we lightly mentioned in the last training. Auditing a vendor invoice or a payable invoice is simply a flag, simply saying that it has been audited. So I just refreshed my screen. I can see all of my vendor invoices that I have currently. And if I click edit in here, I can go ahead and mark those as audited. There is a system setting under options that allows you to only approve invoices that have been audited. It's just another level of security. However, if you don't need that, then you don't have to worry about it. But really, all it is just a flag, and you can come in and you can edit that. You can turn that flag off or turn it on as needed. So that is pretty much the auditing process. It's very, very straightforward. But let's come back to approve to pay. So this is the main screen we're going to talk about under approve to pay is approval for accounts payable. So in this screen, the whole purpose of this screen is specifying what we're going to be paying. If we're doing a check run today, what checks are we going to print out and for who and for how much? The first thing I'm going to talk about is some of this filter information up at the top. Of course, you can filter your invoices by the vendor's currency. So if I only want to see United States currency, I can go ahead and change that if you are working with currency. If you're not, no worries. You can look up by vendor group. So if you have vendor groups set up in the system, you can go ahead and filter the list of vendors by that vendor group. Currently, I don't have any in this database, so we'll just go ahead and skip that for right now. We can also run for a check date. So if we're looking at a specific due date or check date, we can go ahead and run for that. And it will only include invoices that are before or as of that check date. The other options that we have here are approval options. So we're going to go through the manual approval features, but these are approve all or unapprove all options. So of course, if I just want to approve everything and just pay off everything that I need to, I do have an approve all option or an unapprove all option. And then I've got approve all invoices where. So I can specify I want to approve invoices that match specific criteria. So the due date is only approve invoices where the due date of that invoice is less than or equal to so many days. And then you can specify the allowed discount amount is greater than 0 and the discount date is less than so many days. And of course, that is based on today's date. So you can approve invoices in bulk by these features or approve all or unapprove all. Now, what are we talking about when we're approving? So I'm leading the cart before the horse here. When I need to approve an invoice or approve a vendor, I should say, I can do one of two things, or I can do a couple of different options. right here, I'm seeing my list of vendors that I have invoices for. And over on the right side, I'm seeing their invoice information. I'm seeing the number of invoices they have, and I'm also seeing the total amount that I owe them based on those invoices. So, like for Freshworks specifically, I have 8 invoices that I need to approve. If I wanted to approve the entire vendor or the entire amount for that vendor, all I have to do is on the left side select that vendor. So Hector Produce only has one. I'm just going to approve their entire amount. I'm good with that. I'm going to cut them a $500 check. But for Freshworks, I have a few invoices here. I don't want to pay off the entire bill right now. Maybe I just want to pay off things that I know are coming up really quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on Freshworks. I double clicked specifically on that check amount field. That's what I usually do, but you can click anywhere on the line. And what it's going to do is it's going to open up the invoice selection screen. So now I have the ability to approve individual invoices as needed. So I just want to approve these first few, and then I'm going to leave the later ones to be paid off at a different date. So here I've got a total of $655, and I've approved 2 invoices out of the 8. So I go ahead and click save. So that's one option. Now, I do want to go back in here really quickly and show you. It does list out credit memos that exist for this vendor as well. So these are credit memos, whether they're non-inventory or inventory credit memos. They're open credit memos that haven't been applied yet. If I wanted to go ahead and apply a credit through a payment, I could go ahead and do that as well. So here I have 655. I want to go ahead and approve these credit amounts too. So I have a total of $100 that I'm crediting as well. So you can apply credits at this time. And the good thing about applying credits at this time is not only does it apply, but it will show on the check stub what invoices and what credits were applied. So the check will show a total of $555, and it will show the invoices and their totals and the credits that were applied, so the vendor can see a list of exactly what was on that check or why that check is that amount. So that's one way to apply credits. So I'm going to go ahead and just apply one of these credits along with that. So that's one way to apply credits. There is a different screen to apply credits as well. If you simply wanted to apply a credit to an invoice and go ahead and take care of that balance. However, if you applied a credit through the different screen, which we're going to get to in just a little bit, it won't show up on the check stub. So just bear that in mind. If you really want the credit to show up on the check stub, you will need to apply it through this approve to pay screen. All right, the other option is, let's say I only want to partially approve an amount. I only have one invoice here for this test 2 vendor, but I don't want to pay off the entire 2150. That's a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to partially pay this. So once again, I double click on the vendor, and from here I can drill down on a specific invoice, and I can specify how much I actually want to approve. So here I'm going to say I'm going to pay $1,000 today, and then I'm going to leave the 1150 to be paid off at a later date. So I'm going to partially pay this amount. So I'm going to go ahead and click approve. So it doesn't show you that an invoice has been approved, but it does show you the amount that was approved. So when I click save, I do have an amount here, even though the line isn't fully highlighted in green. So just bear that in mind. Look at the check amount, not necessarily for the color coding. All right. So let's say that's all I want to do for today. Those are the payments that I want to approve for today. So I can do one of two things. I can close and choose to print checks later. Or if I want to go immediately into the print check screen, I will save and print checks, and it will immediately open up the AP check screen. I'm going to go ahead and just close really quickly because we are going to get to the AP check screen in just a sec. So when I click close, it'll ask me if I want to save, yes or no. I went ahead and clicked yes to make sure that I save my changes. So that's the approve to pay option. So that is the second step after creating the invoice. in order to pay off this vendor, is approving the amount that you want to actually pay. Then we come to vendor payments. So as I said before, you can save and print checks, and it will automatically take you to this print check screen. I just wanted to show you the manual route, uh, just for, yeah, just because. So vendor payments, print checks. So this is the first option we have as far as paying off a vendor. So this is actually printing checks from Edible. So here, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to click this pound sign and make sure I see which vendors I am printing checks for. So here I can see, all right, I've got Freshworks, I've got Hector, and I've got Test2. So it's going to print one check per vendor. We do have a setting if you need it to print checks per invoice. It's not as widely used, so we default to printing one check per vendor. But if you need that, that is something that you can change. So let's say I want to go ahead and just approve or just print Freshworks. Maybe I'm only printing a check for Freshworks and I'm paying these two off in a different way. So I'm just going to go ahead and select Freshworks for now. I'm going to go ahead and click close. So it'll show me that vendor. If I have all vendors, of course you saw all vendors were shown, and if I have multiple vendors, it just shows multiple vendors. I'm going to choose my bank account. So right now I just have the one bank account for Chase Checking. So that's the bank account that this check is being, or that this amount is being pulled out of. And then I've got my pre-printed check number. So this is following your check stock. So anytime that you print a check, it should be the next check that is available in your check stock. However, if it is different, or if this is the first time that you are printing checks, you will want to make sure that this number matches what is being loaded into the printer tray. So here, I'm going to say this is correct. So I'm just going to leave that be. And here I have my check date, just making sure that my check date is correct. Since we're only printing for one vendor, we don't have to worry about that right now. However, if you want to print checks in order, you want to say, okay, this 063 is going by vendor ID rather than the name. That just controls which check number goes to which vendor when you're actually printing. So right now we don't have to worry about that since we're only doing one. The last thing to look at is the type of check that is printing. So if you're using a matrix printer, of course, you'll want to go ahead and select that. This you don't have to select every time, of course. This is preset for the first time that you print a check, and then it's remembered every single time after that. So you don't have to worry about this as much. But just to show you, if you're using a dot matrix printer to print your checks, you'll want to make sure we print that. If we're using a laser printer, which of course is more common, then we're just going to specify what is the type of check we're using. Is this a stub check stub? Or where the check is in the middle? Is this a check on top and stubs on the bottom? Or is this stubs on top and check on the bottom? And it's kind of unlikely that the check number isn't already there if you have a pre-printed check. However, if for some reason you're using a completely blank layout, then you can go ahead and choose to print that check number on there if it doesn't already exist. Obviously, though, since we're using a pre-printed check, we don't have to worry about that. And then preview mode, you won't worry about. This is for an admin user. I'm logged in as an admin user right now, so you guys won't see this. But otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and print. And it will tell me how many checks I'm printing. So, of course, if I had all three, it would show me 3 checks are being printed. I'll click OK. I'll choose my printer. So I'm just going to go ahead and print a PDF. And specify where that's going. Okay. So that has been sent off to the printer. Now we have one final step, and that's specifying, did this check print out the way that I wanted it to? So if the check printed completely, no issues whatsoever, I don't see any problems with it, I can mark it as printed. So you can mark them individually, or there's mark all options. So I can mark it as printed. Marking it as printed basically means we've used up this check number, and the invoice was correct, the amount was correct, so I'm good to go. If there was an issue with printing, for the 2 main examples is I printed to the wrong printer, there was a disconnect between the printer, or I forgot to load the checks and I printed to a blank sheet of paper. Then what we would want to do is mark all as not printed. What that allows you to do is reprint with the same check number and reprint for this vendor for this amount. So it's like nothing happened essentially. And then marking it as destroyed essentially means we did print to the check, but then we realized there was a mistake after the fact. Oh, I printed this for the wrong vendor, or I included an invoice that shouldn't have been included, so I had to tear up that check. Or of course, there's a printer jam issue, or the check smudged and we can't send it out. So those would be situations why you would want to mark it as destroyed. What that will do is it will keep the vendor amount in the system, so you can reprint for it, but it will use up that check number to make sure that we're not reusing a number that has been used. So of course, this was good, so I'm going to go ahead and click mark all as printed and save and exit. So as you can see, now my next pre-printed check number is 4. So I'm just incrementing from there. All right. So that is the print check option. And just to show you really quickly what the check looks like. Now, of course, I don't have a pre-printed check and I printed to PDF, so it's not going to look exactly the way we want to. But just to show you, I did the stub check stubs. So this is stubs on each side. And so here's my check. And then, of course, here are the amounts that I mentioned. So, of course, it's a $605 check. These are the invoices, and this was the credit that I had applied as well. So again, if I applied the credit through the normal apply credits area, then that credit would not show up on that check. So anyway, moving forward, some other options to pay. Manual check. So a manual check also follows your check stock, so it is still following that same check information. However, it is a check that you printed or you manually wrote out. So you printed outside of the system for any reason, or you just took a check off the top and physically wrote out the check in order to get it out the door quickly. So same features, just in a different way. I'm going to choose my checking account. I'm going to choose the vendor that I'm printing for. So let's say that Hector Produce. And so here you can see it's still using the same next check number that I needed. I can update the check date. And one feature that does exist for the manual check and the wire transfer that you'll see in just a second is you have the ability to actually update the invoices that you're printing for. So you can actually approve beyond the initial approval what we're printing this check for. So, of course, there's a select all option if I just want to make sure I'm printing for everything that I had approved initially. I can go ahead and click OK, and that will be the amount that shows up on the check. So, of course, here I have all my vendor information. Once I am done and everything looks good, I just go ahead and enter as manual check. So that check number has been used in the system. We know that it has physically gone out. This is simply capturing that physical check in the system itself so that we keep track of it. And then, of course, from here, if I had another check I wanted to print, I can just click New Check and move on from there. All right. The other option is the payment via wire transfer. Now, excuse me 1 second while I quickly remember test 2. There we go. I couldn't remember the other person that I had approved. So going back in, payment via wire transfer. Oh, the EFT. Just for those of you, this is a license module for those that are using electronic funds transfer. It's a relatively new feature in Edible, so it is specific to electronic funds bank accounts. So if you're not using it, don't worry about it. If you have any more, or if you want more information, email us and we can talk about that at a separate time. So I'm going to skip that for today, just so you know. Payment via wire transfer. So this is a payment that basically doesn't use a check for any reason whatsoever. If this was a cash payment, if this was a debit card payment, if this was a wire transfer, then of course you would choose payment via wire transfer. It keeps its own number with the W in front of it to indicate that it is a wire transfer. So here I've actually used this, I believe, twice already. So I'm going to go ahead and choose my bank account, choose my vendor. So as you can see, it's the same thing as it was. Okay, I only used one wire transfer. But it was the same steps as doing a manual check. Choose the bank account, choose the vendor. It will bring up that check number. So I've used a wire transfer once already, so it does keep that unique number. Um, it just has the W in front of it. I put in the check date just like the manual check. I hit check details. So it's pretty much the same exact feature as the manual check. The only difference is that W in front of it. It doesn't follow your check stock. So I can go ahead and enter as manual check, and now I have that payment in my reconciliation as well. All right. We also have a couple of features such as open checks or open payments via wire transfer. Of course, these are situations where you needed to pay something off before you actually had the invoice entered into the system for any reason. The main situation that would call for that is a uh, driver dropped off a shipment and he was collecting payment for the vendor right then and there, so not giving you enough time to get the invoice into the system yet, which is perfectly fine. We can go ahead and cut a check for him right then and there. So the enter open check option gives you the ability to actually print the check from the system or enter it as a manual check. But as you can see, it's same exact steps. Choose that bank account, choose that vendor. So I'm going to say this is Quality Fruit and Veg Company. So as you can see, it does follow your check stock. And then here I'm going to enter in the amount of the invoice. So this was $650. I'm going to go ahead. I can put in a memo if I want to. I can change the name on the check if I want to. And again, I can choose my print options and print the check, or I can enter as manual check. So this one I'm going to enter as manual check just because uh, it's a little bit quicker. So in that situation, I took the check, I quickly wrote one out and gave it to the driver, and then I just entered it in. So now I have this credit balance on the vendor's ledger for that $650, waiting for the invoice to be created. So what I'm going to do really quickly, just for example's sake, I'm going to treat this as a non-inventory payable that I was paying for. So quality fruit and veg, new. So we're quickly dipping into a slight portion of our former training. Enter in the invoice number, the total amount, put in my invoice date, add my line if I need to, and I'm just going to go ahead and put this against electricity because they're also my electric guys. They're really great. They give me produce and they take care of my electricity. So I now have this payable invoice in the system because I've had time to actually sit down and do it. But now, since I have a credit balance or an open check sitting out there for this vendor, I don't actually have to approve it. So approving is for payments that you plan on actually making after the invoice was created, following the normal process. But if you have already got a payment entered in, you don't actually have to approve that amount. All you have to do now is go to Apply Open Checks Credits and select the invoice that you need to apply that check to. This is also how you would apply credits the other way. So if you didn't apply the credit via the Approve to Pay screen, this is the same area that you would apply credits in as well. And it works the same way. If an invoice amount is already approved, then you can't apply a credit to that invoice amount because that invoice amount is already set to be paid rather than being credited. So I'm going to go ahead and click apply. Oh, sorry. What you would do is if you did have multiple open checks or multiple credits, you would select the one that you want up here, click apply, and then you can apply if you had multiple invoices. You can apply this to multiple invoices if you wanted to, or you can just double click and apply to one invoice. Just make sure that the apply date is correct, and then go ahead and click save. And that's it. So now that invoice has been paid by that open check. So of course that was the open check option, and then we have the open check via wire transfer. I'm not going to go through the full full throw on this because it is the same exact situation. It's the same exact steps. The only difference is at the end of it, you will enter as manual check because this is a wire transfer. There's no check to be printed out, but it acts the same exact way as the uh, normal open check. So, yes, there we go. So those are the different vendor payment options. Now, as you can see, we have two other options here. We have an unapply open checks credits and a void check payment. So payables in general is a very forgiving module. If you printed something that should not have been printed and you had marked it as printed, then you can go ahead and void that check payment. It's not going to allow you to choose that check number again because you have already used it, but it will allow you to return that vendor balance back to them so that you can reprint for them. Same thing if an open check was applied to the wrong invoice or a credit was applied to the wrong invoice. Or maybe you applied a credit before printing and you actually wanted that credit to show up on the check stub. Then you can go ahead and unapply that and then reapply it in the approved to pay. So I have this $650 that I had applied to this account, but this $650 open check was actually supposed to be for a different invoice. Kind of a weird example, but all I got for right now. So what I can do is I can simply select the open check here at the top that I want. It will show me the invoices that it was applied to, and all I have to do is click unapply. So it just brings that invoice balance and that check balance back to the vendor's ledger as open, so I can clear those off in any other way that I need to. And then, of course, void check payment. If I created a check incidentally, then I can go ahead and get rid of that check. So let's say the real issue with that open check is that created that I created that incorrectly, and I needed to just completely get rid of it. So I already unapproved it. So now I can go ahead and void it if I need to. I choose the bank account that I printed the check for or created the check for. I'll go ahead and choose the vendor that I created the check for. And here I can see that check. And all I need to do is put in a void date, which we always recommend the void date be the same day as the check date, just so that there's no date conflicts. But once I'm done, I can go ahead and click void check. And void check completed. And that's all there is. So now I can go ahead and move on and pay off that invoice the way it's supposed to be. So at any given point, as long as the check hasn't been reconciled to the bank account, you can void that check as needed. You can unapply payments as needed, whatever you need to do in order to get you corrected. Now, of course, that is all within the realm of an open fiscal period. So you can't go around willy-nilly taking things off if it was in a completely different period. So just make sure that you're working within an open fiscal period in order to do that. All right. Before we get to the check reconciliation, there's one other check option that we have, and that is sundry checks. So sundry checks are actually checks that, are actually checks that have no bearing on your inventory and do not refer to any vendor that you currently have set up in the system. So this is a new fumigation guy that I'm trying out. He came by and he did me a service, so I'm going to go ahead and pay him for it. Or I've got a new gardener that came through and mowed the back lawn, so I'm going to go ahead and pay him. He's not a vendor I have set up, and he didn't do anything with my inventory. So that would be a sundry check. Other examples, of course, is if you needed to pay your employees and you don't have them set up as vendors in the system, you can pay them through sundry checks. So that's another option that we have. But enter sundry check. All I do is click new check. I can enter in the amount, so I'm paying them $250. I'm going to go to my GL account and choose what they did for me. So I'm going to go ahead and say this was my electric guy. So I'm paying him $250. Might be not enough. I don't pay my electric guy enough. But either way, I'm going to choose my bank account that this check is coming out of. I'll go ahead and put the name on the check. Of course, since this is not linked to a vendor, I need to specify who this check is for. So I'm going to go ahead and just put test electric. Never know if I'm spelling things correctly. And then I can put in my address information if need be. That's completely optional. So of course I've got my check date, make sure that's correct, and it is following your check stock. So currently we do not have a way of making sundry payments, sundry payments without following your check stock. So currently the only way to pay off these extra payments outside of your normal vendors and inventories will be through your checks. So just bear that in mind. We don't currently have like a wire transfer option or anything like that. Beyond that, we're going to go ahead and choose our printout option if we are printing the check physically, or of course we can enter as manual check. So since we've been through the print check feature, I'm just going to enter as manual check. All right. So now that sundry check is sitting in my reconciliation as well. The other option that I have under sundry checks is you can import sundry checks. So these will all be entered as manual sundry checks. But essentially, we have a separate set of instructions on how to set up an Excel sheet, save it as a 5.095.xls spreadsheet, and you pretty much just list out the pertinent information: the check number, the name on the check, the amount, the GL account, check date, and I believe the bank account, and that's pretty much it. Excuse me. So that's another way to get sundry checks in. Then we have customer refund checks. So, of course, this isn't having anything to do with vendors, which is why it's under sundry checks, but this is a check that you would be cutting, so that is why it is under payables, even though it's for your customers. So we have a customer refund check. If you have a credit set up for a customer that you're not applying to an invoice or anything like that, you're simply cutting them a check and giving them what they want. So here, I believe I've got one for. I apologize. I forget what I've done as far as my customers. So give me just a sec. Jerry's. Here we go. So here, this Jerry Seafood Company, I've got an open receipt and I've got a credit. And they said, hey, you issued us this credit. It hasn't been applied yet. Can you just give us a refund? So we're going to go ahead and do that. It will show you your customer invoices, as you saw earlier in a couple of those customers. It'll show in red. That's just to show you what's on their ledger, but you can't create a check, obviously, for an invoice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click New Check once I have my customer selected. I'm going to go ahead and enter in the amount of the check here. So I don't have to pay off the full 50 if I don't want to. If they just want 25, I can do that. But I am going to pay off the full 50. So it gives me my check amount in here. Again, make sure that my bank account is selected. It does follow your check stock. So again, we can only give refunds currently through checks through the normal customer refund area. And then the name on the check and the address is based on the customer information. So that is brought through from your customer master file. And once again, from here, we have the ability to print that check via our check information, or we can go ahead and enter as manual check. So again, I'm going to go ahead and just enter as manual check. It'll ask me, do you want to post this customer refund check? Just letting me know if I do this, it can't be voided or anything. It's just like applying a credit on the receivable side is pretty straightforward. It's not like payables. It's a little bit more restrictive. So just bear that in mind. That's why this notice is coming up, because once we do it, we've done it. So I'm going to go ahead and click yes. All right, so now that check has been cleared from the customer's ledger, and I'm paying them off with the check that I've created. All right. And then, of course, the last option is avoid and edit sundry checks. So again, we do give you the ability to void and edit sundry checks that you've created. This does not apply to customer refund checks. Again, that's why we got that notice. So it doesn't apply to customer refund checks. This only applies to sundry checks that we've created or imported. So here, if I come into this screen, I can select my check. So I can choose which check that I want to go ahead and select. So this one was a check that I created for this Trent guy. He didn't do a great job, so I want to go ahead and void this check. So I'm going to go ahead and void check. So again, I can do that as long as the check hasn't been reconciled to my bank account yet. If it's been reconciled, then I would have to go in and unreconcile, which we're going to talk about in just a sec. But at any given point before reconciliation, I can select that check, void it, or I can edit the information. I don't have to void it. Maybe this test electric was actually 255, so I can just go ahead and change that and click save if that was the case. Now, of course, that would be a situation the check printed out correctly. I just had the information entered in incorrectly. So otherwise, that's pretty much it. So now we get to the very last part. So just to recap, we've created the invoices, we've approved those invoices, and we've paid off those invoices. Or we've created open payments, created the invoice, and then applied those open payments. And we've created sundry checks if needed. So all of that has happened to get us to check reconciliation. So just a reminder, the reason that we're going through this like this is because for those of you who are more familiar with other programs that do bank reconciliation in one screen, Edible is currently split into two separate areas. We have your payables that does your check reconciliation, and then we have your customer side or your receivables that does your deposits. So bear that in mind. It's just two separate areas, but this is how we're getting that bank reconciliation taken care of. So here we're working, of course, on the check reconciliation side. All of the checks that I have created, or the payments, I should say, have been created, are showing up in this screen. And I can see deposited, or I can see, or I should say, I can see reconciled checks, or I can just see open checks if I wanted to. So over here on the right side, of course, is my filter options. I want to make sure I'm looking for the correct bank account. I want to make sure that I'm looking up the check status that I want to look up. So I just want to look up outstanding. And of course, cleared. If I wanted to look at my cleared, I can go ahead and do that. Of course, those are my reconciled payments. And once I have what I want in here, and of course I can set this for a check date as well. Of course, you can use the screen to look up historical information as well. But once I have everything that I want in here, I'm going to go ahead and start doing what I need to do. I'm going to go ahead and hit reconcile on the right side. And I'm going to mark all of the checks that cleared my bank account as reconciled under this RCL column. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Of course, we do have select all and unselect all options. So if there are quite a few, you don't have to go through and individually do it like I did. And after that, I'm going to put in my bank statement date. So this, of course, is the date that these checks, as of my checks clearing. My English is no good today, so I apologize. So I put in my bank statement date. I click save, and it will tell me exactly what's happening when I click save. What's the operation doing? This is going to go ahead and reconcile 6 checks. I'm not unreconciling anything, so I can click save. So now those have disappeared simply because I have my outstanding checks selected as my show. If I click all, I can now see all of those checks. Now, again, payables is a forgiving area. If I needed to undo something because I did it incorrectly, of course, in this screen, maybe it was because, oh, you know what, this didn't clear my bank account yet, so I just need to wait. All I have to do is click reconcile. Again, unmark it, make sure that the bank statement date matches, and click Save. Again, it'll show that message saying what's happening. So I'm unreconciling one check, and I can click Yes. And so now that check is still showing in here, but it's unreconciled, so it hasn't cleared my bank yet. So I can make sure that I'm keeping track of what has actually cleared my bank account and what hasn't. Of course, the other reason that you might need to unreconcile is you need to void the check or do something in that vein. That, of course, is an option as well. Some of the other options that you have in here, the bank reconciliation report is here for us to run. So I can run this bank reconciliation report. We can also run this from the receivable side as well. So we're not going to see much happening right now because I haven't deposited anything since we haven't gotten to that area yet. But here I have it showing me my outstanding checks as of this date, and it's showing me my balance per my general ledger. So I've been paying a lot, but I haven't deposited anything. So obviously that's why I am in the red pretty majorly for this bank account. But that is pretty much the bank reconciliation report. I also have a report that I can run. This is the check register that we're going to see when we go through our payable reports. But again, we can jump straight to there from here. And then my statement import is an option to go ahead and update the reconciliation flag for check numbers in here in bulk. So basically, it's not creating check numbers. You still have to create the checks in Edible or create the payments in Edible, but you can go ahead and run a statement report in order to import um, for these checks, whether they've been reconciled or not. Essentially, it lists out the bank account, it lists out the reconciliation date, the check number, and the amount just to make sure that everything matches, and it will automatically update these as reconciled. So if you're a company that has a lot of checks that you need to reconcile on a daily basis, the statement import might be a good option. So if you have any questions on that, let me know in an email, and I can go ahead and get you basically the layout for that statement import. All right. So that is the final step as far as the check reconciliation. Up to that point, we've basically taken care of everything else. Run batch processing is something that I don't know of exactly. I'm not going to lie to you. So if you have any questions, let me know and we can get some more information on that. Not too many clients use it right now as well. So that is another reason why I'm skipping that. Consignment liquidation, we're skipping just for today because this is an entire process that we want to cover from purchase to sale. But essentially, it's just another way to create payable invoices. It's for price after sale purchases. So, for those of you who do you purchase on consignments, of course, that will be another training that will come later on, just a little bit. And then vendor groups is something that we covered last week. Essentially, it's just a way to create groups for your vendors. So very similar to what we have for your item master and receivables as well. And then edible scan payable, again, it's extra module. So we won't be going through that today, but essentially, just to explain what it is, it's a way for you to scan in invoice documents into the system. I believe I mentioned this very lightly last week as well, but when creating the invoices, there's an option to print a summary page that will have a barcode on it with that invoice number. So you just lay that summary page on top of the invoice that the vendor gave you, and that way you can scan those documents in and link up those images to the actual invoice. So that is the purpose behind that. And then, of course, our last training next week will be over AP reports. So it's going to be pretty short next week, just going through these reports. But that is basically it. All right. So that is pretty much payables. If you have any questions, again, send us some questions through the chat window before we end this training, or send us some emails if you think of something later on. Otherwise, I hope you learned something. I hope you didn't fall asleep. But I want to thank you for joining me today. And of course, we will be having these trainings next week and for the continuing following weeks. Thank you guys again and have a great day.